Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jason Ong. I'm the Director of Behavioral Sleep Medicine and Clinical Science at Knox Health. And prior to that, I was an associate professor at Northwestern University, where my research was on developing and testing behavioral strategies to help people with narcolepsy and idiopathic hypersomnia. So I'm really excited to be here today talking about some of the tools we've been developing to help people with narcolepsy and IH. All right, so let's jump into this. I'm going to start off here with an overview in terms of the why, the what, and the how of these behavioral tools. So first of all, why are we doing this? Well, as you know, medications can reduce sleepiness and other symptoms. However, they're not a cure for narcolepsy or IH. So we found that people with narcolepsy and IH have high rates of depression and anxiety, and also that traditional psychotherapy may not be as helpful and may not work as well for people with narcolepsy and IH. So those are the reasons why we need to have custom tools to help improve the quality of life and the mental health for people with hypersomnia. And what are these behavioral tools? So they're behavioral strategies or techniques that oftentimes are used in other chronic conditions, but what we've done is adapted them or tailored them to address some of the symptoms of narcolepsy and to improve mental health in people with narcolepsy. So these are based on cognitive behavioral theory, in some cases sleep science, so what we've learned in sleep research. We've also received feedback and input from people like yourself, people with narcolepsy and IH, to help us customize this further, make sure it's relevant for you guys. Also drawing on clinical experience. So as a clinical psychologist, I was working at a sleep disorder center, and some of this was based on my work with people with narcolepsy and the challenges that they were going through. And later on, you'll hear from Dr. Nelson. She's also a clinical psychologist, and she's also the parent of someone with narcolepsy. So she also brings in a unique perspective here. And finally, how do these fit into a treatment program for narcolepsy? So they're used as a complementary or an additional tool. They're not meant to be a substitute for medication or the standard treatments of narcolepsy you're already receiving. So you should definitely coordinate this with the doctor who's treating your narcolepsy. And the other thing to note is that the tools we're going to be talking about today should not be considered a substitute for any professional mental health treatments. So if you're working with a counselor or a therapist, please continue to work with them. You can mention some of these tools, and if it's appropriate, they might integrate it into the work that you're doing with them. And if you're considering seeking professional mental health treatment, please continue to do so. And I would encourage you to not just rely on these tools by yourself. All right, so we're going to do a little deeper dive into two strategies, energy management technique and a mood management technique. So I'm going to focus on the energy management technique. And what I'm going to talk about is something that we've been calling the Pomodoro technique. And it's about structuring your waking hours. And you'll see down here at the bottom that there's this Pomodoro tomato that's a timer. So this is something used in the 80s or the 90s that really was designed as a time management strategy to help people take big chunks of time and split it up into these smaller chunks of time. And they use this timer to help them keep track of these smaller chunks of time. And the idea is it can make you more efficient in how you use your time. So we've taken this idea and tried to adapt it to people with narcolepsy, because for many people, from the time that you wake up and until the time that you go to bed, it's a big, long stretch of wakefulness. But people with narcolepsy and IH, they may not have the energy to sustain that long period of time of wakefulness. So maybe it could be helpful to kind of break that down into these smaller chunks of time. All right. So sometimes I describe this as a makeover of how you spend your waking hours. And the idea is that it's a method for managing energy and optimizing productivity during these waking hours. And we customize this for each patient. So it's based on symptoms, lifestyle, responsibility. And we use things like diaries, alarms, and social support to help you. So that the idea is that you can ask for help. You don't have to do this all on your own. It's not just a matter of willpower. All right, so I'm going to walk you through the steps of how we do this technique, and then I'm going to follow this up with a case example to try to illustrate how we've applied this to someone with narcolepsy. So the first step is to use a diary or a log to track your activity patterns across the day and night. So let me show you an example. So this is what we call a wake sleep diary. All right, a lot of times in sleep medicine, doctors talk about a sleep diary. We're actually more interested in tracking the activities while you are awake here. So in this example, you'll see that each row is a day, and the columns basically walk you through what happens throughout the day from the time that you get up to morning activities, afternoon activities, evening activities. We have some nap times and rest times that are kind of scattered in there if you're taking those. And then it concludes with the time that you went to bed. All right, so just to give you an idea of one of the diaries that we've been using. Then the next step is after you keep track of your activities for about 1 to 2 weeks, then we focus on certain questions. So the first one is, are there certain times of the day and night when you're particularly sleepy or fatigued? And what are the activities that you're doing during these times? All right. And also, can they be done at different times? So you can see we're looking for creative ways to kind of reposition or move certain activities around. All right. Now, the flip side of this is to also look at, are there certain times when you tend to have more energy? All right. And what activities are you doing during these times? And can you move other important activities to these times? All right. So hopefully this can give you an idea of how we're starting to rearrange some things. Now, the third step is what I call chunking activities or taking breaks. Okay. So, first of all, we take these activities and try to group them into smaller chunks. Remember, that's what we talked about with that Pomodoro strategy. And we try to separate these chunks by these breaks. All right. During these breaks, you can take a nap if you're sleepy. You can have a rest period, just kind of chill out or relax. Just doing something to kind of recharge your batteries. And again, the important thing is just to remind yourself it's okay not to constantly push yourself. All right. Now, this can vary from day to day. It can also vary in terms of the amount of chunks you have across a day. But the important thing is to avoid making it open-ended so that you go into each day with a plan. All right. And as we mentioned, you can set alarms or ask for help to reinforce this new schedule. And you can track your progress by keeping up with these diaries. And that way we can review it. Usually we want to wait at least 2 weeks before we make any changes, but we can make some adjustments if something's not quite working right. All right, so how does this work? So let me give you a case example. This is a 21-year-old male college student with narcolepsy type 2. He came in on modafinil that he takes in the morning. And when he came in to see me, he reported that his sleepiness and fatigue had become worse, and it's affecting his grades and mood. In particular, it was worse in the afternoon and evening, and that his mood was getting worse, and also his social activity was decreasing. So he was a little more withdrawn. And prior to this, he was playing soccer and volleyball in high school, so he was used to being physically and socially active. So this is definitely a change from his previous level of functioning. And he notes that he still likes to work out and play sports, but he just doesn't quite have the energy to do it, and his mood is just getting worse so that he's not feeling like he wants to be as social as he used to be. So we started off by asking him to complete some diaries, and there's a lot of information on here, but let me just try to walk you through a few things here. So the first thing is to look at when he's waking up. And one of the things we honed in on here is that the time varies. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, it's 8 a.m. On the other days, it's 10 a.m. And when we talked to him more about this and asked him what was going on, he said that a lot of times he would be awake by 9 a.m., like especially on the weekends, and he would just kind of hang out in bed as a default. And as you can see here in the blue boxes, this happens in the morning. It also happens in the afternoon when he's also a little bit tired there. Because he said that he has more energy in the morning and he's sleepiest in the mid-afternoon. And then the other thing is that he struggles to do homework or work out in the evening. And one of the things you'll see here in the green box is that that's usually the time in the evening when he's trying to do workouts or his homework. So this gives us a few targets in terms of some things that we can change and reposition. So then we go into this chunking and resting. So we talk about first, or can you wake up at the same time? All right, this is actually very important for our circadian rhythms. If we have a consistent wake up time, this helps the brain understand when to start getting us more alert. So it actually helps us wake up. So we try to get him up at 8 o'clock every day, but he said it was tough on the weekend. So we came up with a little bit of a compromise and said, how about if you wake up at 8 a.m. on the weekends and no later than 9 a.m. on the weekend, 8 a.m. on the weekdays, 9 a.m. on the weekends, because he was saying that he was already awake around 9 a.m. anyway. So basically, we're just getting him out of bed. And then we also move some of the activities that require more energy to the morning time. So the weekend workouts, we try to move earlier. Doing homework, especially on Tuesdays and Thursdays, we try to move that earlier. And then we talked about ways to take more breaks. So having rest periods every 3 to 4 hours, taking a nap if he's sleepy, otherwise relaxing, listening to music is something he enjoyed doing. And again, this idea that it's okay to rest, you don't have to keep pushing it. In talking to him, it sounds like he was used to trying to fight off the fatigue by constantly pushing himself. So this is a way to remind himself that he can actually take some breaks. And the bedtime we kind of left as it is because he had a pretty good bedtime that allows him to get about 8 to 9 hours of sleep each night. So just so you can see how this looks on the diary, you'll see that like the wake up time here now is more consistent. In the blue segments here, you can see that the workouts and the homework have been moved earlier. And then the brown represents the resting time. You can see we have more of them and they're kind of scattered throughout the morning and the afternoon. And in the evening, you'll see these are all green. And the green are the nurturing and fun activities. So we've taken away the work and so forth and the homework that he was doing, moving that earlier so he has more opportunities to just have fun or relax and do enjoyable things in the evening. So how did this work? Well, after 2 weeks, he came back and he mentioned that he had better focus and energy for his homework, for his workouts. He felt that the rest period in the morning helped. He didn't crash as much in the afternoon. So his energy level was more consistent across the day. He also mentioned having more free time in the evenings to do enjoyable activities, and he was starting to get back to some social activities with his friends. He did notice that there were some challenges, and in particular, he said it was still hard to get up in the weekends, even though it's 9 a.m. That that was still a challenge, and he needed to be more consistent with his alarms and his social support. But overall, he felt like he was trending in the right direction, so he felt a lot more encouraged about his ability to manage some of his activities and his energy level. All right, so what are some considerations then when you're doing this Pomodoro technique? Well, first of all, it can be helpful to discuss this with others. They can help you troubleshoot, they can give you maybe some creative solutions. So, talking to parents, teachers, bosses, therapists, sleep doctors, bring them on board as your allies and let them help you. Also, I think it's helpful to discuss this with your sleep healthcare provider, so like a sleep doctor or sleep nurse. They can maybe figure out ways to incorporate your medication schedule into this, your new activities, because some medications can have different lengths of time that they're effective. And the third thing here is that having a plan doesn't have to be restrictive. So a lot of times when I first introduce this to patients, their first reaction is that, oh, great, I'm going to lose my freedom, right? I'm going to be bound by this schedule. But hopefully what you can see with the way that we've done it is that it's actually taking the things that you're currently doing in your life and just kind of repositioning it. All right. So earlier I called this like a makeover of your waking hours. And just like a good makeover doesn't transform you into a different person, what it does is it brings out the best version of yourself. All right. So that's kind of what we're doing here. We're trying to bring out the best version of yourself by having a more efficient way to manage your energy and your activities. All right. So with that, that's all I have to say for now. And I'm going to do the handoff over to Dr. Nelson.
Hi, my name is Dr. Denise Nelson. I've taught at UCLA for the past 20 years. My area of expertise is anxiety disorders and depression. But I also have a teenage daughter who has narcolepsy. And I'm really excited to be here and talk to you about a few mood management techniques that might be helpful to you. In particular, I'm going to be talking about a basic mood management technique that involves the activities of your day. Activities involve a lot of choice, and this is really a very good thing because having choice means that you can exert more control over how you feel. Although looking at how activities affect mood is important for everyone, this might be particularly important for those with narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia. And this is because mood and energy level tend to have an effect on each other. Namely, people can feel that activities that improve their mood help them feel more energized, and people can feel that activities that make their mood worse tend to make them feel less energized and even worse. Now, the first step to improving your mood with this method is to simply monitor your activities. And this is because you can't make adjustments if you don't even know what's going on in the first place. So simply, you're going to be observing your mood before and then after an activity. So you're going to be looking to see, does doing that activity make you feel better or worse, move the needle up or down on how you feel? The method is quite simple. You simply write down the activity, and then before engaging in that activity, you would then pause and observe your mood before, then go ahead and do the activity, and then stop and observe your mood again after the activity again. And here we're just going to be talking about a very simple rating scale. You can use any rating scale that you're comfortable with, but a simple one like the one pictured here is totally adequate. We're going to be talking about mood states very broadly, not very specific mood states. So we're simply going to be talking about feeling very positive or good or negative or feeling bad. And on this number scale, you can see that 0 designates just feeling completely neutral, neither particularly positive or negative. And then on the positive end of the scale, you'll see that +1 represents feeling mildly positive, +2 moderately positive, +3 extremely positive. On the opposite end of the scale, -1 stands for mildly negative, -2 moderately negative, and -3 extremely negative. And before we look at some examples, a few tips with using this technique. First of all, there's a lot of activities in each day. So that would be probably too overwhelming to record. So simply look to just record one activity for each main portion of the day. So 3 total activities. So 1 morning activity, 1 afternoon activity, and 1 evening activity. Certainly, if you'd like to record more, that's totally fine too. The second thing is to make sure you write down your ratings. Obviously, with recording 3 activities a day, each receiving 2 mood ratings, over time, that's a lot of information. It's too much to keep track of. So a good thing to do is to write your ratings down so you don't get confused or misremember them. The Notes app of your phone is a really good place to put all of that information. Most people have their phones on them, so it's a really easy place to actively record each activity as you're out doing them. But some people prefer a dedicated notebook or journal. That's also fine. The important thing is just to have it all written down in the same dedicated place so it's organized and you don't have notes floating all over the place with various mood ratings. And then the third piece is to simply just observe how you feel. Don't judge how you feel. Some people can have a lot of impressions about things like this activity should make me feel better. Exercise should make me feel better. Talking on the phone with a friend should make me feel better. Here, we're just looking for just an honest, genuine rating of how that activity makes you feel. So on to one example monitoring day. In this example, a person has recorded 3 activities of their day, 1 morning, 1 afternoon, and 1 evening activity. In the morning, they decided to take a walk. Let's say in this example, before taking the walk, the person had been doing some paperwork. Maybe they'd been feeling like they're, making some errors. They're feeling a little bit frustrated and impatient. They're not, and when they pause to look at their mood, maybe they give it a mood rating of a -2 or a moderately negative. They're really not feeling so good at that time. Then they go ahead and take a walk. And then after the walk, they go ahead and pause and again note their mood. And let's say in this example, the person notes that they're feeling a little bit more refreshed, a little bit more patient, a little bit more able to stay on task. And at that point, they might assign a mood rating of a +1 to their mood, mildly good. Then in the afternoon, they've decided to take a nap. Before taking the nap, they note that their mood is a -1. Let's say in this example, the person then takes a 3-hour nap. After the nap, they then observe how they feel and they note that it's a -3 or feeling extremely bad. They felt like actually their mood was worse after the nap. And then finally, in the evening, they decided to watch TV, noted their mood before that activity, felt like at that point their mood had returned to a pretty neutral position, just rating it out of 0, not particularly positive or negative. Then they watched TV for 2 hours, and then at the end of that activity felt that it really hadn't moved the needle much one way or another. They felt like their mood was still basically a 0, hadn't really changed things very much. Now, here, one important thing to keep in mind is don't really struggle about the exact mood rating number to give to assign something. So in other words, don't really waffle about, is that a positive one or is that a positive two? How am I really feeling? Really, the most important piece to capture is just simply, does doing that activity move your rating up or move your rating down? Does that activity help to make you feel better or worse from where you started? Is the most important thing to be capturing. And just so you know, right now we're going to be focusing on collecting the data. In a second, I'll get to what to do with that information and to how to make better sense of it. But one more example monitoring day. Again, 3 more activities. Person found that in the morning, talking on the phone with their friend Jill brought their mood up from a pretty neutral place of a 0 to a positive 2. In the afternoon, they decided to start cooking dinner. And before cooking dinner, their mood was a -1. And then in observing their mood after cooking dinner, felt that their mood had improved after that activity and rating it at a +1. And then finally, in the evening, the person decided to look at some social media, noticed that their mood ahead of time was a 0, not particularly positive or negative. They scrolled on social media for about an hour and a half, and at that point, reflected on their mood again and found it to be a -2 or moderately negative, found that it had kind of moved their mood down. So what to do with this data is at the end of the week, you'll simply create a summary sheet of those activities that moved your mood up and those that moved your mood down. So in taking those 2 example days that we just went through, the person found that their up activities were walking, cooking dinner, and talking on the phone with their friend Jill, where the down activities were taking a long nap and social media for them. So the overall action plan given this data is pretty simple. So for those up activities, you want to simply try to add more of those types of activities into your day or week. While for down activities, you want to try to reduce or eliminate those activities as much as you possibly can. So a few more words on those down activities, because that certainly can be a little bit easier said than done. You want to think of creative ways where you can either eliminate the activity entirely, reduce the activity, or find ways to change the activity. So a few examples of those things. An example for elimination of the activity. Imagine you have a coworker that tends to talk your ear off. You don't find the conversations to be particularly pleasant. In fact, you're looking at the clock and you're just thinking about your productive, seconds of your workday ticking by. And, maybe you've always known that you don't like these conversations, but they've just happened. And writing them down and monitoring them so carefully in black and white has really helped you clarify how much of a down activity this really is for you. And it might really make you reflect on, hey, yeah, why am I putting up with this kind of thing? And it might kind of propel you to then find ways to avoid those conversations rather than simply enduring them. The second option is you can try to reduce the activity. So actually in that example that I just gave you about the coworker, it might be impossible to completely eliminate all conversations with the coworker that you don't find particularly pleasant, but there might be ways to reduce those conversations or certainly to shorten them. In another example, you might notice that doing the dishes tends to be a real down activity for you. And again, in that kind of example, it's impossible to not have to do dishes some of the time, but you might be able to reduce the quantity. So you might invest in some inexpensive paper plates. And with that, you can really reduce the amount of time that you need to spend on that activity that you don't really like. And finally, the third option is that for activities that you can't reduce or eliminate, you can note factors that would make the overall activity more pleasant or tolerable and try to act on this. So, for example, if you note that you find doing household administrative paperwork really loathsome, you can decide, you can look at that activity and see what things might change. So, for instance, maybe you find that if you do the activity in the morning when you're feeling fresher, that it becomes much less of a down activity. You make fewer mistakes and it feels a lot better. And actually, this toggles really well onto exactly what Dr. Ong just mentioned in the first part of this presentation, which is better matching an activity to the time of day when you have the appropriate energy level for that activity. In addition, with this paperwork example, you might also note that having a cup of your favorite tea with you when you are doing the paperwork also helps it feel like less of a down activity. So you can note that with making those two adjustments, changing it to a more appropriate time that better matches your energy level, as well as having your favorite cup of tea, it helps it become far less of a down activity. Now, sometimes people can find the data they're collecting very confusing. It might seem like some activities are incredibly variable, sometimes bringing their mood up, sometimes down. It seems to make no sense and they can't figure out what's going on. So for these variable activities, it's you're going to need to collect a few more details on the activity. So in particular, the three most important details to be gathering are: one, who is that activity done with? Is this something that you're doing alone, or is this something that you're doing with other people? If you are doing it with other people, which specific people are you doing it with? The second component is duration. Is this something that you're doing for 20 minutes or something you're doing for 2 hours? And then finally, the time of day. Is this again gets to that matching component, matching the activity that you're doing with the time of day that's more appropriate for that type of activity. And since Dr. Ong actually already covered time of day really very thoroughly in the first part of this presentation, I'm going to focus a little bit more on those first two variables of who you're doing the activity with and duration. So in an example here, in the first example, if you just write down talking on the phone, it might again seem like the data is all over the place, sometimes an up activity, sometimes a down activity. But if you're recording the duration and who you're doing it with, some patterns become a lot clearer. You might note that when you're talking on the phone with your friend Jill, that you tend to experience that as a really pleasant activity. Your mood really kind of tends to improve after those calls. But you might notice that the opposite seems to be true of your friend Becky. Whenever you're talking to Becky, I don't know, there's something that comes up on those conversations that invariably feels kind of bad. And you notice that your mood typically dips after a call with Becky. So that's one way in which you can note who you're doing the activity with can make a difference. In the second example here, looking at duration, again, if you just record Netflix, watching Netflix, it again might look really confusing about what's going on. Sometimes moods up, sometimes moods down. But in recording who you're doing it with, in this case, alone, both times, and duration, that again reveals some important patterns. And here you might find that when you're watching Netflix for a shorter duration, like an hour, it tends to be an up activity. You really enjoy your watching your show and it's interesting to you and it's a good up activity. But you might find that when you're watching it for a longer duration and have more of a binge session of Netflix, that tends to be more of a down activity. So here, watching it for 4 hours, the person noted that their mood went from a +1 to a -2. So especially when activities are, especially when the data is more surprising, you want to make sure that you collect more than one day's worth of data on the same activity. And this is just to make sure that it represents an actual reliable pattern and not something that's a one-off. So for instance, in your friendship with Becky here, that would be really doing a disservice to your friendship with Becky if based on that one data point, you started pulling back and reducing your calls with her. It might be that Becky was having a bad day that day. You could have been having a bad day that day. You want to collect a few days of data to make sure that that really is true, that talking on the phone with Becky is indeed a down activity. But again, that tends to be especially important when the data is surprising. Sometimes when people are doing this, the data feels a bit more confirming. So for instance, it might be that after collecting this data, the person thinks, yeah, that's not a surprise. I know that often after I talk to Becky that I usually don't feel good. That is not a surprise to me. So in that case, it might not be so necessary to collect so many days of data on that exact same activity. And these data are very, very important because they can really inform your decisions. In particular, nobody likes to be told by other people what to do. So as an example, nobody likes to be told by other people, you should watch TV less, or when you watch so much TV, that really makes you feel lousy. So this method simply asks you to take a look at what your own body is telling you about these activities. And in looking at what your own body is telling you, to then see if that informs the choices that you make. So, with this knowledge, you can make a more educated choice about what to do, how long to do it, and who to do it with, and what time of day that it would be best done. So, one final example of confusing data, just briefly, somebody might find that if they write down walking, the mood looks like it's all over the place, but they might notice some important patterns. It might be when they're walking with friends, that tends to be generally an up activity, but they might notice when they're walking by themselves, they might notice the pattern that their mood really tends to become worse during that time. Now, especially with solo activities, you want to note what's going on in your mind. Namely, are there any negative thoughts that are propelling your mood down? A lot of times, for some people, solo activities can be really great. For other people, especially when they're in a more down mood to start, they can kind of tend to dwell more on negative thoughts when they're on their own. So, there are a lot of different interventions for negative thoughts, but within the scope of what we're talking about here, one thing is to change your approach to that activity and you might switch it out, and instead of being solo, have it be one that you're doing with friends. But another thing to do, because people often have to find ways to cope solo, is to simply find other ways to anchor your mind to reduce negative thinking. So things like listening to a podcast or music, so that you can anchor your mind to a more positive place and your mind doesn't just travel off to negative thoughts. So, with these observations of how activities influence your mood, people can feel that they understand their own moods more and that they have more control over the way that they feel through the choices that they make. And finally, there is a strong silver lining that's here. For many people with narcolepsy or idiopathic hypersomnia, they can feel that they don't have as much stamina as other people, and they can wish they didn't have to think so carefully about how to manage their day. However, this can lead people to living life more intentionally. In other words, think more carefully considering what activities they actually enjoy and what activities are meaningful to them. So, ironically, this limitation in stamina might help people to make more choices that lead to a life that's well lived. Thank you.